Good morning. Welcome back to Pipes and Poetry. Welcome back to my garage where we are going to talk about a poem by Dylan Thomas. Now, Dylan Thomas is probably one of the most famous poets we'll talk about, one that probably you're more likely to get, a response from someone on the street. I always talk about this guy on the street, just an average guy walking down the street. If you were to say name a poet, this may be one that gets named. Robert Frost, maybe Dylan Thomas, Shakespeare. But of the sort of modern times, Dylan Thomas tends to be pretty popular, mainly because of his poem that we're not going to talk about today. Do not go gentle into that good night. A lot of teenagers have, not necessarily just teenagers, but you tend to read it in high school. A lot of people take it on as their anthem of angst or rebellion or something like that. It tends to be associated with the YOLO attitude. You only live once, so don't go gentle. I think some people could party or translate it into, get your partying done because, you're going to die. I think there's more to it than that. We're not going to talk about that one. Not today, anyway. The one we are going to talk about is called "The Force That Through the Green Fuse Drives the Flower." Yeah, I don't think Thomas named his poems. We just call him the first line. He may have said that is the name. I don't know about his intent there. Um, so this poem was one of the first poems that I ever read. That I think I realized that I could do poetry. I could read a poem and figure out what was going on there. And I sat with this poem for a long time with like a dictionary, looking up all the alternate meanings, all the words and stuff like that, way back in the day. Now I didn't get that in depth this time. I tried to go off of my memory. Um, but it's a good one if you want to do that. I'd recommend you turn this off, go sit with it, read it about 10 times, look up things. But there's many other ones you can do that too. So proceed on with this one and maybe pick another Thomas poem. So, um, without further ado, let's talk about it. Dylan Thomas was born, I think, 1914. I have it down, but I can't see. Let's see. 1914, died in 1953. I think due to complications of alcoholism. He was an alcoholic. Um, Strange thing about Thomas, not really strange, but a lot of people consider that he wrote his best poetry before he was 20. The date on this poem, I think, is 1933. He was born in 1914, so it puts him about 19 years old. I don't think critically he is as his later poems were as well received, but his early poems were caught on like wildfire. He definitely achieved some acclaim, such that toward the end of his life, I think he survived on doing the lecture circuit about his old poems. But anyway, let's switch over and take a look at the poem. Throughout this poem, I guess one of the things to think about uh, is the idea of sort of things we've thought about in the past, the idea of life and death. Also, the idea of um, natural versus, I guess I would say, unnatural or man-made. Um, we'll see that as we come up. The poem is divided into four main sort of. I think they're called quintains because they're 5 lines. Um, you can see there there it's 4 sections of 5 lines followed with a little. I guess it would be called a couplet. No, the rhyme scheme is sort of. There's some rhyme there. It sort of follows an iambic pentameter, but some lines it sort of bleeds over and there's an extra syllable here or there. I don't know. Read it for yourself, see what you think. I tried to make it fit. We can see the first line. The force that through the green fuse drives the flower. Now, you could pronounce flower, but he doesn't spell it or contract it or any way. So I'm going to read it as he's got it written, whether it fits in the iambic pentameter or not. I don't know if that was. I mean, it's close enough that it looks like it was his intent. I don't want to put words in his mouth or ideas say that that's what he thought, but it's a lot of the lines are close enough that it looks like the goal was to be close to iambic pentameter for some of the longer lines. Obviously, the short line is not. One of the things I will point out, and I'll read this one completely through. One, it's fairly short, but two, something happens late that I think is important, and it does have to do with the. As you've seen before, I'm not a foot and meter guy as far as counting syllables and stuff like I've been doing just now. But one of the things that he does is that if you look, and I'm just going to point this out even before I read it because I want you to pay attention to it as I'm reading it. Right here, there's an enjambment. So this sentence goes on to the next. Right here, there's one. Here, there's one. And then we get to here, and it's a semicolon, but it does stop. So let's see how that sounds. I will try to read it in that manner, without stopping at the end of the line, as I think you should do. But I think it gives some weight there because that's sort of a turning point in the poem. And I think this is a good example of when, enjambments and end stops or whatever you call them are put to good use and they serve a purpose poetically. So let's read through that and see how it goes. Dylan Thomas, the force that through the green fuse drives the flower. All right. The force that through the green fuse drives the flower drives my green age. That blasts the roots of trees is my destroyer. And I am dumb to tell the crooked rose my youth is bent by the same wintry fever. The force that drives the water through the rocks drives my red blood. That dries the mouthing streams turns mine to wax. And I am dumb to mouth into my veins how at the mountain spring the same mouth sucks. The hand that whirls the water in the pool stirs the quicksand. That ropes the blowing wind hauls my shroud sail. And I am dumb to tell the hanging man how of my clay is made the hangman's line. The lips of time leaps to the fountainhead. Love drips and gathers, but the fallen blood shall calm her sores. And I am dumb to tell a weather's wind how time has ticked to heaven round the stars. And I am dumb to tell the lover's tomb how at my sheet goes the same crooked worm. All right. So, short poem, 22 lines, a lot of stuff packed in here. So, let's take a look at sort of line by line. Let's look at what's doing what. So in the first line, it's important to sort of, I'm not an English teacher, so, I know like 3 parts of speech. I mean, I'm just kidding, but, I know subjects and verbs, or nouns and verbs, and adjectives and adjectives. And, if you ask me for a prepositional phrase, I mean, I could pick them out, but, I'm not the greatest at that. But I like to look at who's doing what, or what's doing what. So in the first line, let's go ahead and start with a different color here. Actually, yeah, okay. Let's do red for doing. The force, right? Now this is, I think, that through the green fuse drives the flower, I think is, and if any English teachers watching, forgive me and tell me if I'm wrong. I think it's an adverbial clause or phrase or something like that, because that is being used as an adverb to modify drive. Now, it's not important, but what I want to get to is that this is not the doing. The doing happens right here. The force drives my green age, but it's the same force that through the green fuse drives the flower. Okay, so we can look at something gives the flower, makes the flower bloom. What is that? Some force that goes up through the green stem. He says fuse. Now, is that key? We'll look at that. Or shoot, green fuse. Okay. So that force drives my green age. Now, green here, obviously some sort of a freshness. The green stem, and if it were winter, which we're going to get to here in a minute, if it were winter, fuse might not be green, or the flower might be dead, or but this implies a springtime, same as his green age. We can think of green here. We'll go back to yellow. Green being young or naive, or is used. So the force that through the green fuse drives the flower drives my youth this as well. Then we get this other phrase that's the same. That blasts the roots of trees is, and we'll get back to red here, is. So the force drives his green age, and it is his destroyer. So it makes him thrive in youth, or drives his green youthful age, and drives the green stem of the flower. But it's also his destroyer. So we should be picking up on kind of maybe what he's talking about. What is this force? Let's think about that. We obviously get to it. Then he goes on to say, I am dumb. Back to yellow, just highlight. I am dumb, and obviously here it's pretty plain that he means he's incapable of telling, incapable of speech. Now, I don't think he means he's mute. He can't speak to the flower, but he can't tell the crooked rose, whether it's because he doesn't know, or he is in awe, or some just doesn't understand what's going on enough to relate to the crooked rose, that his youth is bent by the same wintry fever. Remember, I said we'd get to that this wintry fever. Now, that would mean, if we think of winter being the time of dying, the time of old age, then we see that he can't explain to the rose why they have to die. Maybe. He doesn't have the ability to explain that. All right. Let's take a look at the next one. We get the same force, the force, and another one of these phrases that drives the water through the rocks, and we get the same verb, drives my red blood. So the water going through the rocks. Now, I think he would think here through the rocks, maybe it's some form of erosion, and I think we should be getting to maybe what our force here is, and it could be a god, it could be a supernatural force, but here I think it may be just time. But on a large scale, maybe because this force drives the water through the rocks, and also drives his red blood, so makes him live, and his blood is moving, and so he is, aging. It's not really it's sort of implied, I think, or we can assume that, obviously everything's aging. Then the next phrase, that dries the mouthing streams, turns mine to wax. I assume he's talking about his blood here. The water that through the rocks, the force that drives the water through the rocks, drives his red blood, and then that dries the mouthing streams, also turns his to wax. So I guess makes it coagulate, obviously another form of death, where he's destroyed before we had destroyer. Here it turns his blood to wax. It doesn't flow anymore. He's dead. And again, we get another repetition, and we get he is dumb again. But there's some cool little tricks going on here, and this is one of the most confusing parts of the poem that I have found. And I am dumb to mouth, which would mean speak again. Before he was dumb to tell. Here it's kind of the same thing, but he uses this mouth. Now, we could say he just uses it so he could repeat it, and there would be some repetition or poetic devices in there. But, curious word choice. Mouth. I'm dumb to mouth unto my veins. How at the mountain spring, the same mouth sucks. So, this same mouth, I would assume, would be the mouth that can't mouth, can't speak. And we look that the mouthing stream has dried, and now there's nothing there. And so maybe this implies the same thing, that he's dumb to relate why time does this to nature as a whole, man being part of nature. So it does it to the flower. This crooked rose, I would assume, means something's wrong with the rose. It's getting winter. It's not, standing straight up anymore because it has this wintry fever, the same one he has. Same thing. His mouth sucks at this stream that's drying up. His blood is turning to wax. He dies. But he's dumb to tell this to his veins. Now, why he wants to talk to his veins. I don't know why he has to tell his veins. I guess maybe to explain what's going on inside them, because his blood's being turned to wax. Again, it's a little confusing. Worth spending some time thinking about, pondering on. Okay, next we get away from the force, and we get to the hand. All right, so let's take a look. The hand that whirls the water in the pool stirs the quicksand. That ropes the blowing wind, hauls my shroud sail. Okay, so now we have a hand. Now this, I've read about this before. This didn't just come to me out of the blue. What is it? I think I have it written here in John. This is all working. Yeah, okay. I'd hate to have gotten this far along. In John 5:4, biblical terms. Gotta know your Bible for some of these poems. Don't have to be religious. I'm not, but you gotta be familiar with the Bible. But this didn't just jump up and pop to me. So I read this somewhere. There's a healing pool that when the angel stirs it, if you enter, I think while the water is still turbulent or something, that it's healing. So anyway, because we get a hand, so there's a personification here, whether it be an angel or time itself. But anyway, could lead to this force being supernatural, God, something like that. The hand that whirls the water in the pool also stirs the quicksand, which is not healing. You go into quicksand, and the assumption is that you would die. You would be sucked in. That ropes the blowing wind, hauls my shroud sail. So that controls, or the wind, which again would be either the weather affected by time or God or something supernatural. But he says it hauls his shroud sail. Now, real quick, shroud, it looks like, I don't know if Thomas is just confusing nautical terms here or what, but maybe shroud carried a different meaning nautically in different times. Right now, however, a shroud is the lines or cables that hold up a mast. In this sense, I think shroud, he's using it as sort of like a sheet that wraps a body. I mean, if you think of the Shroud of Turin, shrouds that are used for burials. But it's a shroud sail. So because a sail propels a ship. So maybe it's the sail that propels him toward death, which makes sense because the hand that's controlling the wind hauls, usually means to raise in nautical terms. To haul something like you haul the sail would mean to raise it. So it hauls this sail that is his body, his dead body's wrap, moving through and propels him through time toward, obviously, death, right? Because that's what time does. All of us, we're here. Every second that ticks by is moving toward our final destination, if you will, of death. There we go. Let's see what else we got. Okay, then we get this other repetition again. And I am dumb. This time it's a little different. Before he was dumb to tell the rose. He was dumb to tell his veins. Now he's dumb to tell a hanging man. So, and based on the following line, he says, "How of my clay is made the hangman's lime." Now, there was a note in the Norton where I read this that says the hangman's lime, or just lime in general, was typically poured over the body of someone who was publicly executed, some criminal It sped the decomposition process and, got rid of them faster because they were undesirable or, criminal. They had committed crimes and they put them in a unnamed grave, and that was part of your punishment and you got lime poured on it to help decomposition. But let's think again. It's the hanging man, not a hanging man. So the hanging man. What could it be? Again, if we were looking at and we'll see a little bit about. If you go back, let's go back up real quick, and he uses this talked about strange word choices in this part of the second stanza. It's the first time he uses this sort of archaic unto. Now, we don't walk around saying unto each other anymore. We tell each other things, or I said to her, or I said, to him, or something like that. I don't say unto someone. So that's tends to lead us toward, a biblical sort of language. King James Version, maybe, biblical speech, and we'll see some more later. But if we think about that, who's the hanging man who hung, not necessarily by a noose, but hung from a cross? Jesus. So, could he be talking about there? We'll see. But he does say the hanging man. But then he goes on to say how of his clay is made the hangman's lime. So all of this kind of gets to, what he is subject to the same forces in nature that everything else is subject to. The poet is, the speaker here. His blood also turns to wax, the same as the stream that dries up. The thing that kills the trees also destroys him. His clay helps, when he dies, helps form the lime that's used to decompose the hanging man's body once he's taken down. And you can get into a lot of, I don't know, if you think about, in the end, according to the story, once they rolled the rock away, there was no body there of Jesus. His body was gone, because he was resurrected. So this could contain, a lot more sort of theological discussion, not necessarily theological based on what the Bible actually teaches, but on how he's looking at it. If his clay dissolves the body, and if you think of clay as more of the human being, not just the body, even though it's kind of what it means, the body returns to clay, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. We become dust in the end, and dust in the wind. Then, it also encompasses his mind, and his mind could be creating the birth and resurrection as he reads the Bible. Anyway, that's sort of like another avenue to go down if you wanted to think about that. How is a character created that's in a book? Whether it be the Bible or a poem or a Stephen King novel. The character's created when a person opens the book and reads the character, or goes to a play and sees the act. An actor could bring a character to life, obviously, but the person seeing it, captures the character in their mind. Anyway, Could be some of that going on. That's worthy of exploration. But for now, let's just proceed. Now we get to this the last sort of quintain, the last part of the poem that's similar to the rest of the poem, except it has that part I was talking about where right here there's a stop at the end. So let's read through this one again. The lips of time leach to the fountainhead. Love drips and gathers, but the fallen blood shall calm her sores. All right, so let's do our thing. Who's doing what? What's doing what? The lips is our subject here. And what do? They don't wait to get down here. There is no adverbial or whatever kind of phrase that is. The lips leach to the fountainhead, because this sentence is only this long, at least up to the semicolon. So what lips are we talking about? The lips of time, he says. What are the lips of time? I'm not sure. But what do lips do? They can kiss. So you could think about going back to our hanging man of Jesus, this being Judas, possibly. Again, that's just an alternative way of looking at it. The lips of time, though, is what he says. And this could just be sort of a further personification. We got the hand. He doesn't say of time, but you can think of it as time whirls the water in the pool. Now, obviously, we told the story, but he doesn't say that's where he got it from. He doesn't say he got it from John 5:4. He just says a hand whirls the water in the pool. And we tend to think, if you look, the force that threw the green fused drops of flower, this is a creative force. It drives the flower. In the second stanza, the force that drives the water through the rock, it's not creative, it's destroying the rock, but it's erosion and it's sort of making rivers or anything. It's not necessarily creative, I would say, other than creating, a new path for the water. But it also drives his red blood, so it makes him live, and just as the one above drives his green age. In this one, when we get to the hand that whirls the water in the pool, which if we assume that this is restorative, whether or not he's referring to John or not, we assume that's restorative. There is a change here, because in this one, it also stirs the quicksand, which is a change from how the first two have gone. But in this one, there is none of that. The lips of time leach to the fountainhead. The fountainhead would be the origin. So probably maybe whatever this fountainhead, being the source of things. It's confusing. Because if we think all of this was time, now we have the lips of time leaching to the fountainhead, which shows that time as something subordinate to something. Maybe the time. It's a confusing line. You can play around with this one also, but let's just look at it as the lips of time leach to the fountainhead. Love drips and gathers. What does that mean? Love drips and gathers. We can think of, he goes on to say, but the fallen blood. So this again makes me think that it's pointing toward Jesus, at least, or some sort of restore the love being the blood, because I think it's pretty plain. Love drips and gathers, but the fallen blood shall calm her sores. So you can think of blood dripping and gathering. On the cross, Jesus was stabbed in the abdomen, I think, and bled. I think the Bible says blood and water. Um, so, and which again, if you think we have blood, is red blood and water here. But anyway, the fallen blood shall calm her sores. What does the blood of Christ do? Heals, right? If you are Catholic or any other denomination or religion that practices communion, what do you drink every Sunday? You drink wine, but what is the wine? It's the blood of Christ. And what does this blood do? It calms her sores. Now, who is the her here? Let's get to the only one I can think of. Possible. See, this is where it is confusing. The lips of time leads to the fountainhead, and then it stops. Love drips and gathers. So you can imagine that if it drips and gathers, below wherever it's dripping from. But the fallen blood shall calm her sores. I have to look at it, and you could look at it different ways. That the blood is love, and that the her there is time. Right? So the lips of time leads to the fountainhead. By leech is leech is an animal that sucks blood. It attaches to your body and penetrates the skin and pulls blood out of your skin into itself. So if it leaches to the fountainhead, is he referring to the fountainhead as the hanging man who is Jesus? I don't think it has to be read that way at all. But this little sentence here sort of points to that. Okay, so read it, read it again. See how it fits in with the. It's important to see how each stanza sort of can go back and refer to the previous stanzas or carry through some of the same imagery. Anyway, we get to another repetition of, and I am dumb to tell a weather's wind, and this goes back up to the wind from before, and I am dumb to tell a weather's wind how time has ticked a heaven round the stars. Now here's where I get to the man-made versus nature. Again, he can't speak. He can't, or at least he can't tell why this is happening or this story to the weather's wind, how time has ticked. Now, if we assume that this force is time, there's a different version of time, I think, going on here, because ticking time is different than just time, right? Time is an entity that we use. We have a watch that tells time. It mouths time. It doesn't have a mouth, but it tells time. But then there's also just time. Like an animal doesn't realize it's 12:35 on a Sunday. An animal realizes the sun's up. It's time to do what I got to do. Whether you're a bird gathering the worms or building your nest or whatever it is, or a some sort of predator out chasing your prey. If it's night and you're an owl, maybe you got to do something, or a bat, you go gather insects, whatever. But there's no ticking time. You can say time ticks as a way of saying it moves forward. But to say it has ticked to heaven around the stars, again, we get into this idea of, because the stars are in the heavens, right? The stars are the heavens. The stars are the space. But time, meaning our human time, because I think this word ticked carries a lot of weight. It makes a heaven. So it turns the space, the natural, into the, I would say, I think you could say man-made. I mean, creative. The thought is man-made, right? When you think of something, or when you think of a story, make up a story on your own, or write a poem, and that's man-made. Man-made, artificial, just like we talked before, official, which contains the keyword art, a poem, and it creates a heaven, or we could also look at it as unnatural. All of these sort of synonyms for each other. But time has ticked a heaven round the stars. So I'm giving you a lot of different ways to look at this. There are some conjoining interpretations here that sort of all play off each other. But there's not one, again, like most poems, and I'd argue with anybody that ever says that, you can read the poem and this is how it's read. This is what it means. This is, that's not the way poetry works. Not the way good poetry works. Or what I consider sophisticated, or not sophisticated as in intellectual, or sort of the, good poetry. I don't want to belittle anyone else's poems. Anyway. We get that repetition. I am dumb to tell the weather's when. How time has ticked a heaven round the stars. All right. Now, final stanza, which is only 2 lines. And he says, and I am dumb to tell the lover's tune, how at my sheet goes the same crooked worm. Now, I don't know what lover's tune he's talking about. It doesn't seem to be the same. There's love up here. Unless he's talking about the lover being Jesus, who loved mankind, or God who loved mankind. Again, if you go back to John, if we're stuck in John, and maybe this would be the book of John, the gospel according to John, I think, whatever it's called, John. Where you have John 3:16 hanging up all the sporting games. For God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten son. And this would be if you think, we also talked about Jesus' tomb, but I don't know why he has to tell that tomb something. He's telling it that he is going to die. He says, how at my sheet, we can think of this as, I think the Norton actually gives us a note that this is a winding sheet, which is a shroud, a burial shroud, winding sheet, which is pretty much the same thing. So this can go sort of back up to that other stanza. And I am dumb to tell the lover's tune. Again, it doesn't seem like it's his lover or anything, so it could be Jesus' tune. I don't know why he's talking to it again. Also, if you think of tune, let's get back to this whole mouth thing. You call the entrance to a cave a mouth, the mouth of the cave. And Jesus was buried in a cave with a rock. And they moved the rock and it's open. So now there's a mouth there, the mouth of the cave. Many other ways you could look at it. But he says, how at my sheet goes the same crooked worm. Uh, Worms are what happen to you when you die. Think of Pink Floyd. They have songs about worms eating their brain. Um, worms are when you become worm food when you die. Old sayings and poems all over the place. We think of being in the dirt. That's where the worms live, and that's part of the decay process for anything that was living. Is worms eat it, and but it's also regenerative. If you think about it, if it weren't for the worms, the things would. I don't know all the nature and all the science and the biology or whatever's going on there, but worms are necessary for part of that to happen, right? To make new, fresh soil, worms need to eat living things. It is necessary for time to consume living things or even unnatural things like the stream through the rocks. It destroys things, whether it be water flowing, destroying the rock, seasons passing, destroying the flower, also destroying me as every season passes. And remember, there's always so I guess that's another theme, is that of death or destruction and pointing back to this hanging man being Jesus, the idea of, anyway, rebirth. So, go ahead. Let's circle this in something. Let's do green. Green, because it's our green age. So there's those two ideas going on. In his death, the worm is coming after it. And is it coming after it to kill him, or is he coming after it because it's anxious to get this rebirth process going on? That's an idea as well. Things are trying to kill us, but you could look at them as evil, or as a shame or a terrible thing that it happens. But you could also say, hey, this thing, time, or whatever it happens to be, this worm that's coming after you, is, hey, let's get on to the next step. Maybe that's some of that going on. So there's a few ways of looking at the poem. That's what I like about it. Every time I read it and start thinking about it, new things open up. I think that pretty much covered. One of the other things, I think for the last part, let's think about this. He says this idea of, because this is the most repeated idea in the poem, is he is dumb to tell any of these things why this is happening. And why does this bother him? I mean, I think it should bother him, the poet anyway, not necessarily the speaker, but we can assume, if we assume, let's take a minute and just assume the speaker, whether it be Thomas or not, is also a poet. He's writing these lines down. He's dumb to tell why all these things are happening, because there's such big ideas that he can't grasp them, or he doesn't know why. But if you think about, that's his job. If you're going to be a poet, you got to say, I'm the guy who can relate all of these strange things to, and he is doing it, even though he says he's dumb to do it. I mean, this is sort of one of the things I think is cool about this poem, is that he is giving us, the reader, but he always says to tell this specific thing. So he doesn't say he's dumb to tell us, because he is telling us. He's showing through his poem allowing us to think about these things and not, obviously not explaining every detail or everything, but he's giving us an impression or, doing what poets do, because the poet's job is to take these grand things, whether it be love or death or, war or human suffering or these sort of unfathomable, getting back to nautical terms, or ineffable ideas, and putting them so that we can think about them. That's the poet's job. I mean, I think it's a major part. He can't just go tell a story. A real poem can't just be Jack and Jill went up the hill. It's got to have, Jack's got to be a metaphor for something. The pail's got to be a metaphor for something, or else it's a nursery rhyme. And who knows? Maybe Jack and Jill is a pretty deep poem. I've never looked at Jack and Jill, but you could be, the poets. That's not going to get you in the Norton Anthology if that's your goal as a poet. That's not their goal. Their goal is to be remembered, though, for the poems to live on. For most of them, Milton, remember we've talked about, wanted to be turned to stone. He wanted to be a statue because we make statues out of memorable people, people who have done things. So anyway, he is doing what he says he's dumb to do to us, although he can't do it to all these other things he's talking about. But I think it's cool that he throws in there that he doesn't have this ability to relate this stuff when he is in fact doing that thing, because that is his job. That's job number one of the poet. If you're not doing that, again, you're either writing nursery rhymes or you're, doing something else. So anyway, let me know what you think. If you like the video, please leave a like and a comment, follow or subscribe rather, if you desire. And let me know what you think. This has been Pipes and Poetry, and I look forward to seeing you the next time. Thank you.